Let's go ahead and introduce our speakers. I'm going to kick it over to Chris Janis. He is the chair of CII's Power Utilities and Infrastructure Committee. We call it the PUI because we love acronyms. Chris is going to introduce our speaker and our topic today, Mike Dubrueil with PTAG. And with that, I'll kick it over to you guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny, and welcome. Good day to all. I'm glad to see a robust group of people today. And so just real quickly for this webinar, right, I'm gonna kick it over shortly to Mike Dubrueil, who will give us a discussion on implementing collaborative contracts. Today I am pleased, and I want to thank him up front, Mike Dubrueil, for making time to have this webinar so that we can all listen in. And please make sure that you do have comments and questions, put them in the chat, as Jenny said, as that's where the bulk of the learning will be coming from. But as I introduce Mike, he's the managing partner and CEO for PTAG. He has 40 years of experience leading projects and organizations through significant developments, growth from concept through startup, on turnarounds, organizational change management, as well as restructuring and process improvement. Mike is an in-depth senior management, has experience in leadership development, team building, and he's a leader in collaborative projects and construction management. As a project manager and advisor, Mike has been involved in many projects across most industrial sectors, from single sites to programs spanning hundreds of locations. Mike is an expert on collaborative contracting. He regularly speaks in industry forums and serves on industry panels. Currently, he serves as an advisor, coach, and facility owners in the oil, gas, hydroelectric, nuclear, mining industries, and for the planning and use of collaborative contracting. Mike Dubrueil serves as a board of advisor, sector leadership committee chair for the Construction Industry Institute. He's active on 2 CBAs, data analytics and quality. He's also active on 2 research teams, RT383, which we'll hear about at the end of this presentation, and RT394, Pursuing Capital Efficiency. And just on a personal note, Mike has lent a lot of credence, not just for my own development, but also for the PUI leadership team on his continued questioning attitude and strategic thinking. So again, I want to thank Mike for his time today, and I hope we get a lot out of that as we move forward. So Mike, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks again.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. Welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about implementing industrial integrated project delivery, what we call I2PD. And I'll take you through the industry recognizing a need for a change. I2PD came about because back in 2015, the Board of Advisors of CII, we asked the question, how come on industrial projects we weren't implementing collaborative contracting as we were seeing in the institutional world with IPD and in the infrastructure world with alliancing. I'm going to take you through a little bit through the business case as to why. Then we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about the framework and methods and principles. We're going to go through implementation, what it takes, where to begin, a little bit about the multi-party agreement, and then we're going to take you through the phases. This deck is intentionally very dense. There's a lot of detail here. I'm not going to walk you through all the detail. This deck will be made available to all the participants today, and it's designed to be a bit of a how-to for you as reference material. A lot of the concepts here will be going into the implementation guide that we'll be talking about at the annual conference later in the summer. So, recognizing the need for a change. There has been countless studies. This is out of a McKinsey study in 2017 that I particularly like, where there has been a need to move away from hostile, trustless contracting environments that I'll talk a bit about a little later that characterize many construction projects. The challenge in not learning from our past mistakes and not moving forward is there's a continual challenge with cost overruns, schedule overruns, lack of quality, lack of performance that we see on projects. And in one area in particular, the graphic there on the right shows you just a quick Google image I did. And the challenge is you to go do that. Just type in Google construction accidents and then look for images. You'll see daily dozens and dozens of accidents. And so the other cost is there's a human cost in not getting the contracting strategy correct. One of the opportunities by doing it right and going to collaborative contracting, you get a single source of truth. Everything's integrated. Everybody's working together on a single team. The data tools, they exist. They've existed for 10 years. We've just got to decide to use them and put them together based on a single team. And it's been shown that with sufficient upfront planning, incorporating all parties, that productivity increases substantially. Traditionally, design, bid, build, very rigid, purposeful separation of the parties, trust purposely taking out of it. And then over the years, as we've evolved through different strategies, there's been a desire to change the way we work. Projects should be something we look forward to going through every day, as opposed to cringing when you think you've got to go to work on a trustless contract. And as you move towards increasing trust, you get to collaborative contracting. And today we're going to talk about I2PD. And the idea is risk sharing rather than risk transferring. And that happens as on the y-axis as the level of collaboration and integration goes up, and the level of trust increases on the x-axis. You end up in a collaborative contract. And the idea there is to fundamentally improve trust amongst owners and key suppliers. And the goal is to lead improvement in project success rates and costs, schedule, quality, as well as safety. When we started out back in 2015, we surveyed all kinds of different projects out there, including 85 very specific projects. This is a group of projects that came from one of the research teams, one of the participants in the research team. And this was them using integrated project delivery in the commercial world, the institutional world. And what they found is, as you see the projects on the left-hand side, random success. And success wasn't the norm. And as they moved to collaborative contracting, success was the norm. And we've seen this as we've been out there looking at study after study after study, that collaborative contracting is successful. And so, given that we all want to run collaborative contracting, I think Chris mentioned I'm sitting on a research committee that talks about capital efficiency and capital effectiveness. There's a reason we invest in building big assets to generate power or to produce oil and gas or chemicals or paper products, and that we're looking to get a return on our investment. And so part of the research, we looked at what was happening out there in the collaborative world, and we came up with this framework. And that was based on taking principles that we teased out of the commercial IPD world. These 5 principles you see there on the left: continuous communication and issue resolution, jointly developed and validated targets, access to shared information systems, early involvement of stakeholders, collaborative and equitable decision making. And then we picked up principles coming out of the alliancing world, the infrastructure world, coming out of Australia and New Zealand. And those were areas, principles that look like financial transparency among the key participants, shared risk and reward, relational contracting, multi-party agreements, multi-party teams, and then negotiated risk distribution. These 9 principles form the heart of I2PD, and these principles are expressed in other collaborative contracting methods, and that's a whole other conversation. But if you remember one thing, it's these 9 principles coming out of today. And together, these principles make up I2PD and are the I2PD framework. This framework is supported by 21 methods, tools, techniques, lean tools, and they all support one or more of the principles. So if you look at co-location supports about 6 of those principles. And these methods, along with the framework or the principles, are what we call the I2PD framework. And we created this image here of the Parthenon to kind of give you a sense of how it's all pulled together. So the concept is with intense collaboration and integration, using these 9 pillars, the principles I talked about, covered off and supported by the 21 methods, leads to a collaborative and integrated project. And as you put all of this together, as you see on the right-hand side, as you put all of this together, trust goes up, and you end up with the delivery of an industrial project using I2PD. As you begin to get ready to implement an I2PD project, a collaborative project, you need a place to start. And so one of the tools we developed as part of the first phase of the research was a maturity model to help you assess your organization and your supplier's organization in terms of how mature they were. And what we've found over the last 4 years since we started implementing this out in industry is most organizations range between a 1 and a 2. So a lot of companies have used various methods that are out there. Some have used some of the principles that I listed, but they haven't put it together in any formal way. And so this is a tool to help you gauge where you're at. And what we found is that just because you score low doesn't mean you can't move forward. It just helps you identify the training that you need to do with your organization and your key suppliers to be able to help them use the tools and the principles in your project. So this is a key early tool. Something that you're going to see a lot more formally than I can talk to here, otherwise I'd be stealing all the thunder from the annual conference, is we've developed this project selection tool. And we always knew coming out of the first research that certain projects were more amenable to collaborative contracting than others. So this tool helps with you to evaluate project uncertainties, helps to identify project complexities. One of the things we found, the more complex a project, the better suited it is. And so there is a discussion that has to happen that helps you determine, is your project suited for collaborative contracting? Not all projects are a fit for collaborative contracting. And then so once you've picked your project, the idea is to say, okay, which of these 9 principles up here, which of these 9 principles fit my project and the team that I'm going to be putting together? Which of these methods make sense for us to use across the various phases, from procurement, validation, pre-construction, and execution and closeout? As you can see from this little legend down here, that not all principles are used in all phases, and as you get into the sweet spot, the detailed scope and design phase of the project, or over here in the construction phase, the intensity and the benefit that a project would get from using various principles and methods changes over time, and changes depending on what phase you're in. This chart is a representative chart. It's what we've learned over time, that this distribution of these tools are going to necessarily be different for your projects and your team working on the project. So once you kind of pick your project, you pick your methods and principles, the next step you look is to start putting that together in a representative contract, something that we call a multi-party agreement for the collaborative project. I'm not going to walk you through the detail here, but it's a well thought out, easy to follow, easy to read template that we provide. That template is filled out as if it were an existing project. It's not a skeletal template, it's a full template, but you need to fit it to your organization, you need to fit it to your project, and you need to fit it to your suppliers. You will spend a fair bit of time as you start to plan in a collaborative project putting this together. But unlike the very first project we did with Ontario Power Generation, you won't be starting from a blank piece of paper. As you're moving forward and putting that contract together, as you're putting your own internal owners team together, as you're thinking about and you're talking to your suppliers to see if they're interested in participating in this, there's some key areas to focus on, and there's some barriers as well. Change in any industry, and in particular the construction industry, takes time and takes effort. So as we talked about earlier, selecting the right framework, principles and methods, picking your team members based on their culture and their behaviors. You want collaborative, team-oriented individuals as opposed to lone wolves. You will need to be thinking about the risk reward. When we did the very first project, we asked the executives were asked, what is it you're looking for? And they said, we're looking for certainty. Tell us how much it's going to cost, and tell us how long it's going to take. And if you can deliver on that, we're going to be happy. And so what is it you're prepared to give up in this risk reward scenario to gain that certainty as an owner, if those are your two goals? What else can I talk about here? Planning to overcome resistance to change. There's two types of resistance you'll see. There's active resistance that across your shoulders, we don't do it that way, that'll never work. And then that's probably the easiest, because at least it's out there and visible. And then the other type that we see is, and we're probably all guilty of this to some extent, is the resistance to change that we're not verbalizing, that we're not putting it on the table, that it's sitting there and it's part of our biases, and we're uncomfortable, but we don't know how to express that we're uncomfortable with taking a new approach to doing something. So you've got to the point where you've made a decision, you want to go forward, and then you come down to say, okay, well, what does this look like? well, you've got projects, you've got a contract template, you've picked your means and your principles and methods. So how do you organize? So this slide here represents a typical organization of a collaborative contract or collaborative project. The owner and the key suppliers come together and act as one on the project. They're organized into what we call PIT teams, project integration teams, that start with the executive committee at the top. Here, the core group, who are essentially the project managers for the project, and then the various disciplines from legal and commercial in the beginning as you're setting and negotiating the multi-party agreement, the people that control the project, risk, the key disciplines, and then get a process as well in here, and the various other service organizations that are going to support the project through detailed design until you eventually get to construction.
Michael, this is Bob Weibel. You have a couple of questions that have come in.
Go ahead.
For a project that fits into I2PD framework, is there a recommended size or duration for an organization to cut their teeth on the first time through? For example, should an organization use a smaller project to make it through the entire life cycle with I2PD before moving on to the second and third project, or start a mega project to get through?
So that's a good question. What we've learned is one company's small project is another company's mega project. So it depends on who you are. There is a cost. There's an overhead that comes with this. What you're doing, and you'll see it in a couple of slides, is you're shifting a lot of the effort up front early in the cycle. So you're paying up front for planning, and much more intense planning than under the more traditional methods. But that planning is what gives you the cost, schedule, quality, and safety certainty. So I can't give you a dollar value in terms of a project, but there has to be enough to carry the cost overhead. So it's probably not a project that's below 10 million. You know, at one point I would have said a project below 50 million may be too small, but we're seeing projects at 30 million that makes some sense. So depends on the project, depends on your group. One of the things I should have talked about earlier is you don't have to apply all those principles and all those methods. Again, it's a framework and it needs to be right sized to your group. And depending on your project, we think that a larger your project and the more complex your project, you're more than likely to use all of the principles and at least half, if not 3/4 of the methods. Hate to say it, but it really depends on your project and your key suppliers.
Another question is, DBB utilization is sometimes not associated with trust, rather uncertainty in the design or design complexity, budget constraints, or lack of expertise or select expertise for certain services don't always lead nicely to I2PD. If you have any comments on that.
Sure. So if you've got, I'll go to the other extreme. If you've got a project where all the engineering is done and the scope is extremely well known and it's repeatable out there in the marketplace, think of combined cycle power generation. You know, probably not a good fit for, I shouldn't say not a good fit, probably something like EPC might be a better method for that particular project because there's lots of folks out there that can do that type of a project. On the other extreme where you've got you know you want to build the asset, but you really just, and it's a first of a kind. They tend to be something that fits collaborative contracting, where you've got to lean on the expertise not only of your own your owner's organization, but of the industry as a whole, from the engineers out there, the constructors out there, and various OEMs, where you have that less than fully fleshed out approach, where the optimum path to building that asset isn't known. Absolutely. That approach, collaborative contracting, is going to accelerate you all parties getting to where you need to be able to build that asset.
Okay, thank you. We'll take more questions later.
Okay, so just to see if I can do this. So from this approach, and if you go down the collaborative contracting world, you'll live and breathe with this. And behind this is a series of RACI charts that get developed. And each one of these teams is made up of a member from all of the various key suppliers, from the owner, project manager, engineers, OEMs, and constructors. And they form these teams, and they get on with the work that's consistent with the typical titles that you see across here. What that expands into is a series of deliverables or activities. In this slide here, it's really dense, and I'm not going to walk you through it. But again, within that I2PD framework exists the I2PD team. And the senior executive has a member from each of the key parties. They have a role to play. This is an oversight role. They're not active in the project. I would argue they don't charge to the project, but they're there to support the core group and the team here when there's an impasse, when there needs to be a decision made that the core group can't seem to make on their own for one or more reasons. And it happens. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. I've yet to see a decision go past the executive team, just because of the nature of the project. But these guys are better able to compromise on a corporate level than maybe these guys, gals, would be down here at the core group. And then below the core group is the non-owner parties, the engineers, instructors, the OEMs. Maybe it becomes apparent after the fact that you need to bring another party to the table. So same set of duties, they come in typically after the validation phase, but during pre-construction. So this method anticipates that. So again, this is meant for you guys to spend time on, for those that are interested in going down that journey, and lots of detail here. And this has been honed through several projects now. So as you saw a few slides back, we're going to talk about some of the phases that we go through. So there's the procurement phase, and this is the pre-qualifications and procurement of your key parties, your vendors. And you're going to walk through an expressive of interest. So one of the things we find with owners is they say, well, if we take this, we go down this method as a method for project delivery, will anybody want to participate? And it's always a question. It's a good question, but I can tell you that almost everybody, not everybody, but almost like 99% of the suppliers out there want to participate in collaborative contracting over the other methods. It is important for them to get certainty in schedule and certainty in cost, as it is for the owners. They want to know when their resources are finished so they can plan and move them on to the next project. So, and they want to know that they're going to make the margins that they expected on the project. And they want to do it without fighting. They want to do it in a collaborative manner so that all the energy is going towards building the project, solving the project problems that come up on every project, but doing it with the point of view of the project in mind. And then the next phase after that is the request for proposals. And the request for proposals look like your standard RFPs that you put out there, or call for tenders, depending on your language. But they include a section on collaborative contracting requirements, the scoring requirements, roles and responsibilities, like I talked about earlier. You're introducing those concepts so that your vendors, not only can they price out their particular scope that they're bidding on, but they understand how to price out and how to resource through the collaboration effort as well. Once you've picked your team, once you've picked your suppliers, you move into what we call the validation phase. The validation phase is where you're reviewing the scope and coming to agreement on the scope. The scope is at a detailed scope, maybe some preliminary design work, but enough of a scope to remove inconsistencies in assumptions so that all parties are holding the same assumptions on what the scope is, not only on their particular scope, but the scope that affects them and the scope that they affect, so that everybody's lined up in terms of understanding the work that needs to be done. During the validation phase, you need to have, as I talked about, enough scope development done, and that's where some preliminary engineering may come into it, so that you can develop a level 3 schedule and a class 3 estimate. That level 3 schedule and that class 3 estimate are needed along with an integrated risk plan to be able to have all parties enter into a multi-party agreement. And because it's that level 3 schedule and that class 3 estimate that the risk reward plan is going to be developed on. So your risk and your reward are based on achieving these goals. Now, the risk reward plan is updated and based on what happens during the next phase, pre-construction, but the major concepts are all set here at this place. That all gets expressed, the scope, the technical specifications, the schedules, the estimates, the risk plans, and the preliminary construction quality HSC plans are all referred to and put into a validation report. Think of this as the business plan that all parties agree to, that goes to the owner for acceptance. If the owner accepts, then all parties sign on to the multi-party agreement. Once the multi-party agreement is signed, you move into detailed engineering and procurement phase, and it's what you would expect under traditional contracting, except it's one team. The owner's engineers, as I showed you in the pit team diagrams earlier, you all sit in a big room environment. And yes, we've learned during COVID, a big room environment, well, it's not ideal, can work using modern video conferencing technologies such as Teams, GoToMeeting, Zoom, etc. Particularly when the teams have met in advance of that and they've got to know each other. So during pre-construction, the goal there is to finish the detailed designs, finish your construction planning, finish your quality plans, your HSSC plans, finish your commissioning, and put all the detailed planning you need to be able to design your facility, procure the components for your facility, and get the plans ready and approved to be able to actually build the facility. And at the end of pre-construction, you've gone through and you continuously upgraded your schedule, so you're now down to a level 4, potentially a level 5 schedule. You've updated your estimates. You're now at class 1. Everybody is signed on to all the assumptions in the scope and the estimate and the schedule that's gone in. You've developed detailed RACI charts, and all of that gets expressed out into a finished schedule and estimate, set of plans, and those plans get expressed into what we call the estimated maximum price, what the group believes now that they're ready to sign on to. That price amends the risk reward plan, and that becomes the target that all parties are shooting for as you go into the construction execution phase. Your execution phase, in many ways, in most ways, looks the same as you would under any other method. Again, big exception is it's operating as one team. That construction team is not just your GCs, but it's an integrated construction team for your general contractors, your constructors, your subs, your engineers with their field engineers, and the quality people, and the owner, and the operations people from the owner, all involved in that site team as part of the build. And what that team looks like is determined through your pre-construction planning. So you kick off that session, you do some training, whatever's pertinent. Last planner, for example, maybe how you're going to manage your construction weekly with look-aheads. Your site pit team, I just talked about what that looks like and how they're going to interact with the core team, and how the core team does a job of project management and continuously removes barriers so that the construction team or the site, what we call the site pit team, can get on with doing its job. And you work through the construction methods and activities that you developed during the pre-construction phase. So not a lot of outside that core difference. This is an integrated construction team. And then finally, you move into your commissioning activities and your closeout phase. The key here is your commissioning has been involved. You've been doing your commissioning planning since the validation phase, through the pre-construction phase, and in construction. Commissioning is not left to an afterthought at the end. And you work through the various activities for commissioning, your punch items, any deficiencies that need to be rectified post construction, your final submittals, lessons learned. The key thing here is your risk reward calculations, and then your final closeout. So why? Again, just to reiterate, why collaborative contracting? Why I2PD? One, what we've seen is it provides for optimum and faster designs. The methods of bringing the engineering teams together and the constructors together in the big room using value engineering and other methods improves the cycle time that those team of people can move forward with developing the designs and the construction plans. It improves cost certainty. Instead of the back and forth process we have under existing traditional methods, you've got all the right people in the room for as much time as you need them in the room to agree on what you all believe are going to be the costs associated with that project. And it's not just one or two people, it's all the right experts criticizing constructively and pushing and pulling and coming up with better ideas, so that you've got the cost certainty you're looking for. And then finally, that leads to improved schedule certainty. And we see it. It's just there. The structure of this type of contracting strategy facilitates all of this, all of the inputs into a project, getting the broadest and the most thorough airing. That doesn't mean you'll catch everything, particularly on these first of a kind type projects. But it's my particular belief, as we do more and more of these collaborative contracts out there, we as an industry will get better at doing collaborative contracting. And we're certainly seeing that now on our first project as we're planning our, it's an 8-year project or program. We're just finishing up the first project, and we're in the planning of the second project, and we're taking lessons learned and improvements into the second project. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce Burwell, who's going to talk about the annual conference, and then we'll move into questions. Bruce.
Great, thanks, Mike. You can hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. So our I2PD journey, as Mike said, started back in 2015 with the phase 1 of the research. At that time, I represented Ontario Power Generation on that research team, along with about 20 other industry members and organizations. I was fortunate enough to implement I2PD into the OPG project that Mike had mentioned, and we went from a blank sheet of paper in April of 2018 to having all the contractors into a validation phase, OEM, GE, engineering, QA/QC, and the OPG team. So that's an ongoing pilot project. You'll hear more about that pilot project at the CI annual conference in Cleveland in August. We'll be sharing some lessons learned and other implementation discussions regarding that pilot project. But right now we're in phase 2 of our I2PD research. We kicked that off in January of 2020, and we'll be reporting out on those findings of that 2 years worth of research again at the annual conference. But phase 2 of the research is an ongoing research. We're planning on measuring 30 pure I2PD projects. We've developed these 11 key result areas that Mike has up there in the screen. In addition to cost, certainty, schedule certainty, safety, etc. But there's also KRAs developed for change management, stakeholder management, business objectives, and so on. So you'll hear more about that at the annual conference as well, comparing I2PD back to traditional contracting models. Phase 2 of this research, Mike touched on the I2PD selection tool. If you join us at the conference, we would welcome if you bring a project or two, and we'll run it through the selection tool. As Mike said, I2PD is not a fit for every project, and there's still going to be a need for traditional projects. But if your particular project has a lot of construction uncertainty and design risk, perhaps I2PD would be a good fit for your particular project. The principles and methods selection tool, that slide that Mike showed of the 21 methods and the 9 principles across all the project phases, and layer on top of that was the I2PD phases. That selection tool will be demonstrated as well at the annual conference. The guidebook is key, and Mike and I get asked this question all the time. You know, how do we implement an I2PD model within our organization for one of our projects? So this guidebook was developed as well. The OPG project I talked about, and then we're going to have an industry panel. There's going to be 4 of us sitting on that panel, and we're going to be discussing and taking questions regarding implementation. A lot of organizations, you know, have seen, you know, back in 2018 when we reported out, you know, what is I2PD. We've moved into that next phase now of how do you implement I2PD. So we would certainly welcome any questions, and any folks that are on the line today, if you have you know, any further questions prior to the annual conference, we between Mike and myself, we'd be glad to help out. So I'll turn it over to Robert if there's some questions that the group may have.
Yeah, well, we will take a few of them here. We will answer all of them, as Jenny indicated at the opening, but we'll have to address those in writing. But let me just cover a few. What's the best way to sell this approach to owners?
Capital efficiency and capital effectiveness. That's one way to say that, Bob, which is subject of another research team. Certainty. Bruce sold it to his company based on schedule and cost certainty. In the end, what we found is well, certainty was the goal. There was significant opportunity to improve both cost and schedule. And we continue to see that on other projects. So best way to sell it is certainty of outcome.
Okay. What is the level of interest that you're seeing from financiers for I2PD projects?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Beyond collaborative contracting is something some of you may have heard of as OS2, Operating System 2. What's next for construction? Compared to the manufacturing world, they're into Operating System 4, so we're playing catch up. So I talked about the construction industry being a little slow to adopt change. Well, that's the same with the financial community. So, you know, the financial community, well, they want certainty of return on their investment. It's hard for them to understand this new method when they barely understand the existing methods. They understand their piece of it, they understand finance, but so what we're seeing is hit and miss. So it really depends on who the individuals are representing the financiers. Certainly, CII has a group of financiers at the table, and I'm going to get this wrong. Jenny, you can help me here. Global Infrastructure, I think their name is a member, and they certainly look at this as a method of helping them determine whether or not they're going to finance a project. Again, they're looking for certainty.
Okay. What's the mechanism for sorting out who pays when something is forgotten or changes are needed? We are in high-tech project business where even the best validation does not identify all the issues.
That is an amazing question and an amazing thing to live through, because you've engaged the rules through the risk-reward plan up front. And while you may not catch every technical component or every specific construction method, you've engaged in their whole risk-reward planning that says, when these things come up, how do we deal with them? So in general, one of the things I didn't get a chance to talk to, there's one contingency pool. And in general, when the group as a whole forgets something, it comes out of the contingency pool. If it's something that's highly material to the project that everybody acting in good faith missed, and it's something that can wipe out the contingency pool with one issue, then the parties have to sit down and discuss that as a whole. But in general, if you miss something, it comes out of the shared contingency.
Okay, we have time for just a couple more. At what level do you believe the most hesitancy exists to use I2PD model? So owners, engineering, contractors, subcontractors. And does the construction market what role does it play where an IPD model is selected, when it's being selected?
Yeah, so the biggest hesitancy comes from the support groups. It's not from the project teams, because they've been handcuffed under existing construction delivery methods. It's not and when I mean the project teams and the construction teams, I mean whether it's an owner or the suppliers, engineer companies, etc. Where we find the greatest hesitancy is those organizations that support them. Supply chain, IT, HR, finance, risk. Those are the groups, and it varies depending on the grouping, but it varies. But those are the ones that are comfortable in their middle management organization, and stuff comes in on the left and it goes on the right, and I've got it down to a science, and this is what I want to do. So that's where we tend to see the biggest challenges, is to get them to step outside their comfort zone. Whereas the project people, they live and breathe every day. If you're in projects, you're outside your comfort zone every day. So hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, one last question that we'll field here. The rest we'll answer in writing. This model can work if project has adequate time for planning. Can this work for fast track projects?
So absolutely. One of the things I thought Bruce was going to actually say when he was talking about his role at OPG, when we started in April and we were in validation by October, that's normally a 2-year project, a 2-year process within OPG. So, we cut it, the whole get into the project down to 7 months from 24 months. So absolutely. And probably could have sped that up further. But at the same time, OPG was doing that. We were figuring out how to apply all these various methods and principles, and developing collaborative contracts, the first generation of that collaborative contract. So there was a lot of first of a kind stuff that came out of the research team that took some time as well. So absolutely, this speeds up the time to market.
My last push would be to those on the call. If you're a non-CII member, if you're thinking about joining, please reach out to us. Some of that information is on the website. Some of that is there. You can touch base with Jenny and she can guide you. But those that are in CII and those who are in the POI sector, we'd like to have more involvement from our membership group. So if you'd like to do that and be joined on a leadership team, or just have more involvement, or like to present out similar to like Mike did, please reach out to us, and we'd make arrangements for that, because that's where the learning comes. It's not just reading documents and looking at spreadsheets and charts, but it's actually this interaction. So I appreciate all those that ask questions, and as Bob said and Jenny said, we'll get back to those that we didn't answer on a written format. So I appreciate all those that were on today. Again, Mike, thanks for most of that was on you. So again, I appreciate that. And we reached our time limit, so I will let everyone go. Have a great, safe day and be healthy. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Enjoy your day.